Hello everyone, welcome to Mythstory, the show where we talk about myths from around the globe. For today's show, we're going to be talking about one of the first ever monotheistic religions, Zoroastrian mythology. Zoroastrianism has been around since the 6th century BCE. Zoroastrianism is based on the Avesta, ancient scriptures written in Old Iranian which have been corrupted and damaged over time. Zoroastrianism appears to have begun as a spiritual expression of a peaceful group of people in Persia, modern-day Iran, who called themselves people of righteousness. It began with one supreme deity, Ahura Mazdah. After Zoroaster's death, however, the religion began to change drastically. It was taken over by later converts who added to the religion and modified existing concepts of it. They added gods like Mithra and Anahitam. They also turned Ahura Mazdah into Ohrmazd, the principle of goodness, and Ahriman, the principle of evil. For the purposes of this video, I will be discussing the stories from the original form of Zoroastrianism. So let's begin from the beginning. Creation. In the beginning, there was the endless light, and the god Ahura Mazdah. He used this light to create the endless form, which he used to create the material world. Like two sides of a coin, he created an ideal world and a physical world. The ideal world contained the power of the word, while the physical world contained the power of nature. Concepts like consciousness and idea were contained in the ideal world, while everything physical was contained in the material world. But all of it was part of the endless form. After creating these worlds, or dimensions, so to speak, he created matter. Then he created conception and hollowing. This means that when humans would try to explain something, the true nature of its existence would be lost. Then Ahura Mazdah began the creation of actual objects, like the stars, the sun, and the moon. He created Earth and the first human. He gave the celestial objects the ability to rule over all creation, and they became the highest natural creation. From all this, the world began to truly take shape as we know it. The trees began to grow, animals began to emerge, and this material world was left to develop on its own. Yima. One day, Zoroaster, the prophet of Zoroastrianism, went to Ahura Mazdah and asked him about the first man he had spoken to. Ahura Mazdah said his name was Yima, and began to tell Zoroaster his story. Ahura Mazdah came to Yima one day, telling him that he was to be king. Yima said he would gladly be king, and that under him the earth would thrive. There would be no wind too hot or too cold, no disease or no death under him. Ahura Mazdah was glad to hear this, and gave him a golden ring and a small dagger, made with gold. Under Yima, 300 years passed and the earth flourished. It was filled with flocks and herds, men and dogs, and birds, and all seemed pristine. Then Ahura Mazdah said to Yima, "O fair Yima, the earth has become full of flocks and herds, of men and dogs and birds, and of red blazing fires, and there is no more room for flocks, herds, and men." Yima saw this problem and faced the sun. He placed the ring on the ground below and stabbed the dagger through it. He then asked the earth to open up and stretch so that it may hold more of creation. A fissure appeared, and the earth grew. Once again, the earth was filled with flocks and herds, men and dogs and birds. The world was restored once again. After another 300 years, the world was once again filled with all these creatures, and again they had no space to live. Ahura Mazdah asked Yima to make the earth grow again, and that's exactly what Yima did by, again, putting the ring on the ground and stabbing the dagger through it. The world grew in size, and once again, fit for the living. Another 300 years passed. The world was replenished again with flocks and herds, men and dogs and birds. Ahura Mazdah came to Yima again and told him the world was overflowing with creation. And this one last time, Yima stretched the earth to create more space. The world was now twice as large as it was before, and it seemed there was no need for Yima to continue stretching it. Legend of the Grain of Wisdom. Long ago, there ruled over Iran a great king whose name was Vishtasp. Vishtasp had immense wealth and many victories to his name. One day, he was returning to his capital from a visit to the provinces when his entourage passed an orchard of exceptional beauty. The land around the orchard was desolate. It was clear to the eye that preparing the land for cultivation would have been a task beyond the abilities of most people. The people tending the orchard must have worked with great foresight, wisdom, dedication, and diligence. Within the grounds, Vishtasp noticed a group of people engaged in earnest discussion. Vishtasp turned to a minister traveling with him and inquired about the orchard and the people. The minister told the king that this was the renowned sage Zoroaster's garden. The king had heard of this wise man and his growing fame. He decided to invite Zoroaster to his palace to answer questions which the king's many advisors had not been able to answer to his satisfaction. When Zoroaster was brought before the king invited Zoroaster to his palace to discuss how a person could gain wisdom. Zoroaster asked the king to excuse him since his work in the orchard could not be neglected. However, Zoroaster reached into his satchel and gave the king a grain of wheat. Zoroaster told the king the grain had been his teacher and had many answers to many questions. At first, the king felt annoyed with Zoroaster's response. He nevertheless returned to his palace with the grain. On the chance the grain had some magical properties, the king placed the grain securely in a gold box. Every day, he opened the gold box and looked at it, hoping the grain would have answers to his questions. Every day, he was none the wiser. After some months of frustrated waiting, the king decided to visit the sage once more. The king showed Zoroaster the grain in the gold box and asked him what lesson the grain was supposed to teach. Whereupon Zoroaster asked the king what would have happened if instead of placing the grain in a gold box, the king had planted the grain so that it could receive food and water. Together they reflected on the many lessons they could learn from that simple act. First, in order to grow and transform, the grain would need to be removed from the gold box and grounded in the earth. As with the grain, the king realized he needed to step out of his comfortable surroundings. Then, in the same way the innumerable forces of nature would flow towards the grain to nurture its growth, so would he be nurtured with knowledge and understanding. The grain was only as apt to teach as the king was ready to learn. The answers to the many questions he had lay around him. The ability to understand them and grow in wisdom lay within him. Instead of just seeing, he would observe. Instead of hearing, he would listen. Instead of demanding answers from others, he would develop his own mind and seek answers through insight. King Vishtasp's quest for wisdom had begun. Zoroastrianism doesn't have many myths or legends. Most of their sacred texts are used for spells, divination, and other rituals. It's not really a story-based belief system. Thanks for watching this episode of Mythstory on Zoroastrian mythology. Make sure to like and subscribe, and tell us what mythology you want us to cover next in the comments below. And if you really love us, consider supporting us on Patreon. We'll see you next time.